What if the worst mistake of your life turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you? A single father who had nothing, a CEO who had everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy, one wrong table, one impossible night, and a little girl who refused to let either of them walk away. This is the story of Noah Bennett and Victoria Sinclair, two broken people who weren't looking for love, weren't ready for it, and found it anyway in the most unlikely place imaginable. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Now settle in, this one's going to take a while, and it's worth every minute. The reservation was for 7:30. Noah Bennett found out about it at 6:58, which gave him exactly 32 minutes to change his shirt, bribe his neighbor Mrs. Kowalski with the last of the banana bread he'd baked that morning, and drive across town to a restaurant he had absolutely no business being in. He almost didn't go. He'd been standing in his kitchen, still in his work clothes, paint flecks on his forearms, grease along his left knuckle from a busted pipe fitting he'd spent the better part of the afternoon fixing in someone else's basement, when Danny called. Danny Ruiz, his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding 9 years ago and at his wife's graveside 3 years after that. The man who had an uncanny ability to complicate Noah's life in ways that felt like favors. "I need you to do me the biggest favor of my life," Danny said, before Noah had even finished saying hello. "What did you break?" "Nothing. Look, I made a reservation at Aurelius. You know Aurelius?" Noah didn't know Aurelius, but the name alone sounded like something that came with a dress code and a corkage fee that cost more than his electric bill. "I made this reservation 6 weeks ago," Danny continued, talking fast the way he always did when he knew the answer was going to be no. "It's a blind date thing, this matchmaker service my sister set me up with, and I can't go because Rosie's water broke an hour ago, and we're at the hospital and—" "Danny, your wife is in labor." "I know that, Noah. And you're calling me about a dinner reservation. It's a $400 deposit, man, non-refundable." And the matchmaker lady said, "If I cancel within 2 hours, they blacklist me from the service. And my sister will never let me hear the end of it. So I just need someone to show up and explain in person that there was a family emergency. You want me to walk into a fancy restaurant and tell a stranger you stood her up because your wife had a baby. When you say it like that, it sounds bad." "It is bad, Danny." "Noah." Danny's voice dropped. "Please, just go, have a drink at the bar, tell the maitre d' what happened, apologize to whoever she is, and leave. 45 minutes, tops. I'll owe you forever." Noah looked at the dishes in the sink. He looked at the drawing Mia had left on the kitchen table. A purple house with a lopsided sun and 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall and one very small. And beneath them in her careful 7-year-old printing, me and Daddy. He looked at the empty chair across from his at the dinner table, the one that had been empty for 3 years, and he thought about how another Friday night alone was going to feel. "Fine," he said. 45 minutes. He didn't know it then. He had no way of knowing, but that one word, fine, was the word that changed everything. Aurelius occupied the 14th floor of a building in the Meridian district, the kind of building with a doorman who wore a coat that cost more than Noah's car. The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides and played music so soft you couldn't quite identify it, which Noah suspected was intentional, the same way the lighting in the lobby had been calibrated to make everyone look younger and more expensive than they were. He'd worn his cleanest dark jeans and the gray button-down Mia had given him last Father's Day. She'd picked it out herself with money she'd saved from her allowance, and that made it the best shirt he owned regardless of what it looked like. He'd scrubbed the grease off his hands. He'd run a comb through his hair. He was as presentable as Noah Bennett knew how to be, which he was acutely aware was not very presentable at all for a place like this. The restaurant's entrance was floor-to-ceiling glass, the city spreading out below it in a grid of orange and white light. Noah stepped through the door and immediately felt the temperature change. Cooler, quieter, the air itself seeming more composed. A woman in a black jacket materialized in front of him. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Yes, it's under Ruiz, Danny Ruiz. I'm actually here on his behalf. There was a family—" "Of course, Mr. Ruiz." She smiled the practiced smile of someone paid to make uncomfortable people feel briefly comfortable. "Right this way." Noah opened his mouth to correct her, to explain, but she was already moving and he was already following, and the restaurant was very large and very full, and he didn't know what else to do. She led him to a corner table near the window, secluded from the rest of the room by a low partition of frosted glass, and a trailing plant that probably had a name in Latin. The table was set for two. A single candle burned in a low crystal holder. There was already a glass of water on the far side, which meant whoever his dinner companion was supposed to be, she hadn't arrived yet. Noah sat down. He would wait 5 minutes, he decided, explain the situation when she arrived, apologize, leave. He picked up the menu and looked at it and put it back down because the prices made him feel briefly dizzy. He looked at the city through the window instead, the cars moving 14 floors below like slow-moving light. And he thought about Mia, who was probably asleep by now, in Mrs. Kowalski's living room with the television on too loud. And he felt the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time without anyone noticing. He was still looking at the window when he heard the sound, a soft mechanical hum, the precise rotation of wheels on hardwood floor. And he turned around and saw her. Basim. Victoria Sinclair moved through the room the way a storm system moves through a forecast. Not aggressively, not loudly, but with the absolute certainty of something that cannot be redirected. She was in a wheelchair, a sleek custom model that moved under her hands with practiced efficiency, and she wore a deep navy dress that did nothing to diminish the authority she carried in her posture, in the set of her jaw, in the way her dark eyes swept the room with the unhurried precision of someone accustomed to assessing everything and dismissing most of it. She was, Noah would think later, the most contained person he had ever seen in his life, like someone who had learned very precisely how much space they were allowed to take up and had decided to make that space count. She reached the table and saw him, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite surprise, more like a recalibration, the way a person adjusts their expectations when the world delivers something slightly different from what was ordered. "You're not who I was expecting," she said. It wasn't rude, it was simply accurate. "No," Noah agreed. "I'm not. I'm sorry. My name is Noah Bennett. I'm a friend of Danny Ruiz. He was supposed to be here tonight, but his wife went into labor about 2 hours ago, and he asked me to come explain in person and apologize." Victoria looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the chair across from her, which he was occupying, then back at him. "You sat down," she said. "The hostess led me here before I could explain. I was going to wait until you arrived, and then you sat down at my table." "I did." A pause. "That's either very rude or very confident," Victoria said. "Given that you apparently came here to apologize for someone else, I'm leaning toward rude." "You're probably right," Noah said. He started to stand. "I'll go find the maitre d', let them know the situation. Again, I'm really sorry for—" "Sit down." He stopped. Victoria had looked away toward the window, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. She had the hands of someone who worked, not with tools or pipes or paint like Noah, but with keyboards and phones and documents, the work that didn't leave visible marks but wore at you just the same. "You've already ruined the evening," she said without looking at him. "I drove 40 minutes in Friday traffic. The least you can do is sit there and let me have a glass of wine before I decide whether to bill your friend for my time." Noah sat back down. "Can you actually do that?" he asked. "No." She reached for the water glass. "But it would feel satisfying to threaten it." And despite everything, despite the paint flecks he was pretty sure he'd missed on his left elbow, despite the fact that he was sitting in a $400 restaurant he had no right to be in, occupying the seat of a man whose wife was currently in labor, Noah Bennett almost smiled. Her name was Victoria Sinclair. He hadn't known that walking in. He'd found out from the Matchmaker Services confirmation card that Danny had forwarded to his phone. "Your companion this evening, V. Sinclair, table 7. And it hadn't meant anything to him at the time because Noah Bennett did not read the business section of any newspaper and did not own stock in anything and had not watched cable news in 2 years. But if he had, he would have known. Victoria Sinclair was the founder and CEO of Sinclair Adaptive Technologies, a company valued at somewhere north of $4 billion that made specialized software and hardware for people with physical disabilities. She'd founded it at 24, in the year after the accident that had left her without the use of her legs, and had built it into one of the most influential companies in the assistive technology sector over the following 6 years. She had been on the covers of 3 magazines. She had been profiled in outlets that described her variously as visionary, ruthless, a force of nature, and in one profile written by a journalist she had apparently cut off mid-interview, aggressively difficult. She had not been on a date in 14 months. She had agreed to this particular evening because her assistant had signed her up for the matchmaker service as a joke, and because when confronted, Victoria had decided, in the particular way she decided most things, which was by refusing to appear affected by anything, that refusing would mean the joke had landed. So she'd said fine. She'd made the reservation. She'd driven 40 minutes in Friday traffic. She had expected another evening of watching someone try to be normal about the wheelchair while being very obviously not normal about the wheelchair. Another careful, effortful conversation with a man who was simultaneously trying to prove he wasn't uncomfortable and radiating discomfort from every pore. Another polite exit after 45 minutes and the quiet, familiar return of the particular loneliness that she had spent 6 years building architecture around. Instead, she got Noah Bennett in his off-brand button-down, with paint flecks on his elbow and an honest face, and the singular distinction of being the first man in recent memory to sit down at her table without asking permission and look mildly guilty about it rather than defensive. She didn't know what to do with that exactly, so she ordered a glass of wine and waited for it to get worse. It didn't get worse. The conversation started the way conversations start when neither person particularly wanted to be having it, haltingly, with the obligatory exchanges, jobs, and where are you from, and isn't the view something? Noah answered honestly and without performance. He did odd jobs, handyman work, some contract labor, a bit of tutoring math to high school kids on Tuesday evenings. He lived in Crestwood, the neighborhood on the east side, the one the magazine profiles never mentioned. He'd grown up in Ohio. He had a daughter. She was 7. Victoria watched him while he talked. She had spent a long time learning to read people. It was, she'd decided, the most useful skill she had developed in the years since the accident, when she'd lost the ability to stand up and walk away, and had to instead learn to sit and watch and calculate. She was good at it. She could usually tell, within the first few minutes of a conversation, where the cracks were, the places where a person's presentation didn't match whatever was underneath. With Noah, she couldn't find them, and that bothered her more than a little. "You said you do odd jobs," she said. "Is that what you've always done?" "No." He turned his water glass in his hands. "I was an engineer, mechanical, specialized in mobility systems, wheelchair tech, prosthetic interfaces, that sort of thing." Victoria went still. "Was," she said. "My wife got sick about 5 years ago. I took leave to help care for her. Then she passed 3 years back, and I needed to be around for Mia, my daughter. She needed consistency more than I needed a career, so I stepped back from the field. The contract work and the handyman stuff. I can set my own hours, be home when she gets off the bus." He said it plainly, not with self-pity and not with the particular strained dignity of someone bracing for sympathy. Just as a fact, the way you state a fact. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "That's a significant sacrifice," she said. "She's a kid," Noah said. "It's not a sacrifice, it's what you do. Most people don't. Most people probably have better options than I did." He paused. "Or they make different choices. I'm not judging anyone." "I am," Victoria said. Something about the flatness with which she said it surprised a laugh out of him. Not a polite laugh. A real one, sudden and unguarded. And Victoria noticed how different his face looked when that happened. Like a window opening in a building you'd assumed was shut. She looked away before he could notice her noticing. At 7:53, the hostess appeared at the table with an expression of polite bewilderment. "Mr. Bennett, there's a young girl at the front who says she's your daughter?" Noah closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. "How did she get here?" "She says she took a ride share. She has your phone number written on her wrist in marker." Victoria made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Noah stood up. "I'm sorry," he said to Victoria. "I'll just—" "Bring her back," Victoria said. "You don't have to I know I don't have to." She reached for her wine glass. "Bring her back. I'm curious." Bong. Mia Bennett was small for 7, with her father's dark hair and her mother's eyes, wide-set and very dark, the kind of eyes that made adults feel vaguely that they were being assessed. She was wearing mismatched pajamas under a jacket because she had apparently packed the jacket herself and had either not noticed or not cared about the pajamas. She had a stuffed rabbit tucked under her left arm. She had ink on her wrist that said Dad, 5550147 in careful block letters. She walked to the table with the self-possession of a small person who had decided she was not going to be embarrassed by anything, and she looked at Victoria, and Victoria looked at her. "Hi," Mia said. "Hello," said Victoria. "I'm Mia. I followed Mrs. Kowalski's cat out the door, and then it was taking too long to find him, so I just came here instead." She looked at the wheelchair with the direct, interested gaze of a child who has not yet learned that looking is impolite. "That's a really good chair. Does it go fast?" Victoria blinked. "Faster than I should probably take it indoors," she said. "What about outdoors?" "Outdoors, I've been known to alarm pedestrians." Mia considered this with great seriousness. "Cool," she said. Then she climbed into the chair beside her father, tucked the rabbit under the table, and reached for the bread basket. "Are we eating? I'm hungry." Noah looked at Victoria with an expression that contained, in roughly equal measure, exhaustion, apology, and the helpless affection of a man who has long since lost the ability to be surprised by his own child. "She does this," he said. "I can see that," Victoria said. And then, because something had shifted in the room in the 30 seconds since Mia Bennett had walked in, something light and air-like, difficult to name, she flagged down the waiter. "Could we get another place setting, please?" What happened over the next 2 hours was not what Victoria had expected from any evening, let alone this one. Mia ate most of the bread. She asked Victoria 4 questions about the wheelchair in the first 20 minutes. Not awkward, probing questions, but the direct, practical questions of a child with genuine mechanical curiosity. The kind of questions that made Noah look at his daughter with a slightly different expression, like he was seeing something he'd suspected but hadn't confirmed. How do the wheels turn if your hands are busy? Does it have a motor? What happens if the battery dies? Can you pop wheelies? Victoria answered all of them. She found, to her own surprise, that she didn't mind. "Your dad said he used to work on chairs like this," Mia said, through a mouthful of bread. "Mobility systems, that's what he called it." "He mentioned that," Victoria said. She glanced at Noah. "Do you miss it?" Noah was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes." "What would you change?" She picked up her fork, turned it in her hand. "About the current generation of chairs. If you were still in the field." He looked at her. Surprised, she thought, that she was actually asking, that it wasn't small talk. "Weight distribution on the powered models is still wrong," he said. "They're built for flat surfaces. The average user doesn't live on flat surfaces. And the interface design it's built by people who don't use the chairs. You can tell. Every single time." "I know," Victoria said quietly. "Your company's latest model, the Apex series." She raised an eyebrow. He knew her company. She hadn't expected that either. "The Apex. What about it?" "The weight distribution issue I just described? Still there. It's better than anything else on the market, which I know, but the turn radius on uneven terrain is—" "I know," she said again, and her voice had a different quality this time, lower, with something tight underneath it. "I know exactly what's wrong with it. I use it." A beat. "I know you do," Noah said. Not backing away from it, not apologizing, just acknowledging it. "That's why I'm telling you." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. She put her fork down. "Huh," she said. It wasn't a word that she used often. It was the sound of something not computing correctly, of a model that had produced an unexpected result. "Huh," she said again, softer. And across the table, Mia looked from one adult to the other with the patient, watchful expression of a 7-year-old who understood very well that something was happening here, even if she couldn't have named it. The interruption came at 9:17. Noah had gone to the restroom. Mia was telling Victoria about her teacher, a woman named Miss Hartley, who was apparently excellent at math, but terrible at remembering names, and had called Mia Maya for the first 2 weeks of school. When a man appeared at the table. He was tall, in an expensive suit, with the calculated carelessness of someone who had practiced casual for a very long time. He was with a group, 3 other men in similar suits, a woman who looked like she wished she were somewhere else. They had the loose, loud energy of people who had come from somewhere else, some other dinner or event, and had walked through Aurelius on their way to the bar and seen something that interested them. The man, Victoria had gone completely still, looked at the table with a thin smile. Victoria. He said her name the way some people say a word they're amused to find themselves saying. I didn't know you did the blind date thing. Callum, she said. One word. Her face had changed. Not afraid. Victoria Sinclair did not look afraid of anything, Noah would think later, but armored, like every soft thing in her had retreated behind glass. Who's the friend? He looked at Mia. Did you bring a child on a date? She's with me, said a voice. Noah was back. He had, it turned out, not gone very far. He'd been held up by the waiter near the partition, and he'd heard the last 30 seconds of the exchange. He came to the table and set his hand on the back of his chair and looked at the man called Callum with an expression that was absolutely neutral. You know Victoria? Callum asked, looking Noah over with the particular assessment of a man who had spent his whole life measuring other people against himself and finding them lacking. We're having dinner, Noah said. Simple. Not aggressive, not defensive, just a fact. Callum looked at Victoria. Something moved behind his eyes, something unpleasant, an old score being calculated. She didn't mention she was seeing anyone, he said to Noah, as if Victoria weren't there. Though I suppose she's had trouble keeping people around, that's, well. He picked up a glass from a passing tray, not his, just one available, and took a sip. It's hard to make things work when you can't. Finish that sentence, Noah said, and I'll need you to explain it to the restaurant manager. Callum stopped. The group behind him had gone quiet. The woman who had looked like she wished she were somewhere else now looked like she very specifically wanted to be somewhere else. I don't know you, Callum said, his voice cooling. No, Noah agreed. You don't. Another beat. Callum looked at Victoria, waiting, maybe, for her to say something that would put Noah in his place or restore the balance of power he was used to, and Victoria looked back at him without expression, her hands perfectly still in her lap. Enjoy your dinner, Callum said finally, and moved away toward the bar, and his group followed. The table was quiet. Mia had been watching all of this with the rabbit held tight against her chest. That man, she said after a moment, was not very nice. No, Noah said, sitting down. He was not. He looked at Victoria. She was looking at the candle flame, her jaw set, her fingers curled around the edge of the table. He didn't say anything about what had just happened, didn't ask if she was okay, didn't rehash it, didn't offer commentary. He just looked at her until she looked back. More bread? He said. Victoria looked at him for one long second. Then something in her face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but the thing that comes before a smile, the unlocking of it. Yes, she said. Please. The elevator broke at 9:45. Not the restaurant's main elevator, the accessibility lift, the separate mechanism that ran parallel to the main staircase for patrons who needed it. It stopped between the lobby and the 14th floor with a grinding sound that made everyone in the vicinity go quiet, and a man in a busboy uniform appeared and said very apologetically that maintenance had been called and it might be 30 minutes. There were 3 other patrons who needed the lift, an older woman in a motorized chair, a man with crutches and a leg brace, and Victoria. The maitre d' was apologetic and flustered. He offered a private area to wait. He offered to call building management. He offered, with the particular helplessness of someone whose problem is outside their skill set, to look into it. Noah said, "Can I see the panel?" Silence. "The control panel," he said, "for the lift mechanism. Can I access it?" The maitre d' looked at him as if he'd suggested something mildly illegal. "Sir, maintenance has been called for a 30-minute window on a Friday night in a building with a packed restaurant. I'm a mechanical engineer. I worked on assisted mobility systems for 6 years. I just need to look at the panel." Another beat of silence. The older woman in the motorized chair said, with considerable feeling, "Let the man look at the panel." The panel was in a utility closet adjacent to the lift. Noah crouched in front of it with a pen from his shirt pocket and a flashlight on his phone. And Mia crouched next to him because Mia went where her father went, and he worked for 11 minutes. Victoria waited at the mouth of the hallway. She watched him work. The efficient, no-wasted motion way he moved, the way he talked to himself very quietly as he problem-solved, the way he turned once to check on Mia and make sure she wasn't touching anything she shouldn't be. She watched the set of his shoulders, the concentration in his face. She thought about what he'd said about the Apex series. the weight distribution, the turn radius on uneven terrain. She thought about the fact that he hadn't asked what was wrong with her, hadn't looked at the wheelchair the way people looked at it, either pointedly ignoring it or pointedly not ignoring it. He'd just looked at her. The whole evening, just at her. She could not remember the last time that had happened. The lift engaged with a mechanical thunk and began to move. A sound went up from the small gathered group in the hallway. Not applause exactly, but the collective exhale of several people who had been very frustrated for 11 minutes. The older woman's companion patted Noah on the arm. The man with the leg brace shook his hand. Noah came out of the utility closet and looked at Victoria. "Faulty relay switch," he said. "Textbook fix. Should hold until maintenance gets here, but they'll need to replace the whole relay board within the week." "How do you know it's the whole board?" "The burnout pattern. Also, it looked like it's been running hot for a while. Maintenance has probably been pushing it." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Tell whoever owns this building to call me if they want. I'll fix it properly." Victoria looked at him. She'd had him assessed and assessed again over the course of the last 2 hours, and every time the picture came back slightly different, slightly larger than the frame she'd tried to put around it. "You're full of surprises, Noah Bennett," she said. "I really am not," he said. "I'm extremely predictable. Ask anyone." "I don't think that's true," she said. And she didn't. She really didn't. They parted at 10:20 in front of the building while a rideshare idled at the curb for Noah and Mia. Mia had fallen asleep against Noah's shoulder somewhere during the wait for the lift, and he was carrying her with one arm, her rabbit dangling from the same hand. Victoria sat in the night air and watched the city move. "Thank you," she said, "for the lift, and for earlier, with Callum. You don't need to thank me for either of those." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm choosing to." A pause. "He was my fiancé 2 years ago, before you ask." "I wasn't going to ask?" "I know." She looked at Mia's sleeping face, the easy, unconscious slack of it. "She's remarkable." "She really is." His voice was different when he said it, softer. "She's the best thing I've ever done. Probably the best thing I'll ever do." "Don't sell yourself short." "I'm not. I just know what the competition is." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. The thing that came before a smile, that small, unguarded opening. "I'll think about what you said," she said. "The Apex series, the weight distribution." "You don't have to. I want to." She said it firmly. "I want to think about it." He looked at her for a moment in the orange and white light of the city. There was nothing romantic about the look. It was too direct for that. Too uncomplicated. Just the look of one person taking a clear reading of another person, without agenda. "Okay," he said. "Good night, Victoria Sinclair." "Good night, Noah Bennett." The rideshare pulled away. Victoria watched it go, Mia's face just visible through the rear window, already deep in sleep. She sat in the night air for a while after it was gone. Her assistant would ask her tomorrow how the evening went, expecting the usual answer. Fine, pointless, don't schedule another one. She was trying to figure out what she would say instead. She didn't have an answer yet, only the particular awareness, sharp and new and slightly alarming, that the evening had done something unexpected to the careful architecture of her interior life. Not broken it, not disrupted it, but opened a window somewhere that she had not realized was sealed. The city moved below her. The night was cool. Somewhere, in a hospital across town, a woman she would never meet was becoming a mother, and the chain of accident and favor and wrong table that had led to this evening had begun with that. Victoria Sinclair had not believed in coincidence for a long time. She was beginning to reconsider. She turned her chair and went back inside, into the elevator that now worked, up to the lobby, out to her waiting car. She sat in the back seat with the city sliding past and said nothing to her driver and thought about weight distribution and relay boards and the face of a sleeping child with ink on her wrist. She thought about a man who had sat at the wrong table, in the wrong shirt, and told her the truth without being asked. She thought, huh. And then, quietly, in the privacy of the back seat, with the city moving all around her, for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Sinclair smiled. She told herself she wasn't going to call. Victoria spent Saturday morning the way she spent most Saturday mornings. At her desk by 7, coffee going cold at her elbow, working through the backlog of emails that accumulated over the week like sediment. Her apartment occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Westfield district, all glass and clean lines, and the kind of deliberate minimalism that looked effortless and wasn't. Everything had been designed around her: the counter heights, the door widths, the layout of every room. And it was beautiful and functional and very, very quiet. She worked until 10. Then she closed her laptop and sat looking at the city and thought about weight distribution. She told herself she wasn't going to call. By 11, she had pulled up Sinclair Adaptive Technologies' internal engineering files on the Apex series, the ones she rarely looked at directly because looking at them too closely meant confronting things she already knew and hadn't yet fixed. The weight distribution issue, the turn radius problem, the feedback she'd received from users that the design team kept flagging as within acceptable parameters, while she kept feeling every single day that acceptable parameters was a phrase invented by people who didn't have to live inside the limitations they were measuring. She sat with the files for an hour. Then she called her head of engineering, a man named Prakash, who answered on the second ring and had the slightly startled quality of someone caught doing something that wasn't work on a Saturday. "The apex turn radius on uneven terrain," she said without preamble. "Where are we on that?" A pause. "We've had it flagged for the next revision cycle. Q3 rollout. What's blocking it now?" The weight redistribution would require retooling the chassis. The cost estimate is, it's significant. Significant meaning what? Significant meaning the board has pushed back twice. Another pause. More careful. "Victoria, is something... I'll call you Monday," she said, and hung up. She sat with the silence of her apartment and thought about a man crouching in a utility closet with a pen and a phone flashlight, talking to himself while he worked, turning once to check on his daughter. She thought about what he'd said. "It's built by people who don't use the chairs. You can tell. Every single time." She picked up her phone and called her assistant, who forwarded her Danny Ruiz's contact information, because Danny Ruiz had made the reservation and the matchmaker service had his details on file, and this was technically a professional inquiry. She told herself it was a professional inquiry. She found Noah's number in 40 minutes. She stared at it for another 20. Then she typed, "This is Victoria Sinclair. I'd like to continue our conversation about the Apex series, if you're willing. VS." She put the phone face down on the desk and went to make fresh coffee. Her phone lit up 4 minutes later. "Sure." "When?" No punctuation, no pleasantries. She found to her considerable irritation that she liked that. Well, they met on Tuesday, which was the soonest Noah could manage around Mia's school pickup and a plumbing job in the Ashford neighborhood that had taken 2 days longer than estimated because the previous owner of the house had apparently made several creative decisions about pipe routing that no licensed plumber would have endorsed. He came to the Sinclair Technologies building in the financial district, which was a glass tower with the company name etched in brushed steel above the entrance, and a lobby that made Aurelius look modest. A security badge was waiting for him at the front desk with his name on it, which suggested that Victoria Sinclair's administrative operation ran with a precision that probably frightened people. He was wearing clean work clothes, not a suit, he didn't own one, but clean dark pants and a decent jacket he'd found in the back of his closet. He'd told Mia where he was going that morning over breakfast, and she'd said without looking up from her cereal, "The chair lady?" And when he'd said yes, she'd nodded like this was both expected and correct. Victoria met him in the lobby personally, which he hadn't expected. She came around a corner in the Apex chair, in a gray blazer and dark pants, her hair pulled back, and she had the same quality she'd had at the restaurant: contained, precise, taking in everything. "You found it," she said. "It's a large building with the company name on the front," he said. "I managed." The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, the precursor to one. She led him through the building, and he paid attention the way he always paid attention to built environments. The door widths, the floor transitions, the way the elevator buttons were positioned, the small negotiation required at the entrance to the main conference room where the threshold plate was slightly raised. He didn't say anything. He noted it. The room she took him to wasn't the main conference room. It was smaller, off a side corridor. A working room with a long table covered in technical drawings and a whiteboard that had been written on and partially erased multiple times, the ghost of previous arguments still faintly visible in the surface. There was a model of the Apex chassis on a stand near the window. "My engineers don't know you're coming," Victoria said, closing the door. "I wanted to hear your perspective before I take it back to them. They have a tendency to explain why things can't be done." "Most engineers do," Noah said. "It's how the job is structured. You have parameters, you work within them, you explain why departing from them is difficult." "Is that what you did?" "Until I stopped," he said. He was looking at the chassis model. He came to it and crouched to examine the wheel housing, the joint where the frame met the base. "Can I touch it?" "That's why I brought you here." He picked it up, turned it, ran his thumb along the rear axle assembly, tipped it to look at the undercarriage. He said nothing for 2 full minutes, and Victoria watched him and didn't fill the silence, which he appreciated. "The problem is here," he said, indicating the rear weight distribution bar. "And here," the axle offset. "When you go from flat surface to a grade, say a cut curb or a ramp transition, the chair wants to pull left. The motor compensates, but not fast enough for the user's body to stay balanced. On a manual chair, the user compensates instinctively. On an assisted model, you've taken that instinct away from them and given them a motor that's a half-second behind." Victoria had gone very still. "That's exactly what it does," she said. "I know. I've had engineers tell me for 2 years that it's within parameters." "It is within parameters that were set by someone who doesn't use the chair." He set the model back on the stand. "The parameters need to change." She looked at him for a moment. Then she crossed to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. "Show me," she said. "What would you change?" He took the marker from her. He stood at the board for a moment, organizing the problem the way he organized all problems, from the core outward, the simplest version of the failure, and then what grew from it. He started to draw. They worked for 2 hours. It wasn't, and he was aware of this the whole time, a normal thing for a Tuesday afternoon. He had a plumbing estimate to write up. She had, he was fairly certain, an entire company to run. But the problem was genuinely interesting, and she asked genuinely good questions, the kind that didn't come from someone performing interest, but from someone who had been living inside a problem for a long time and was hungry for a different entry point. She pushed back on him twice. Once, when his proposed axle offset would have required a chassis retool, she said the board had already rejected. He held his position and explained why the retool was the right call, even given the cost. And she listened, and then she said, "I know. I've been saying that for 6 months. Say it again so I can quote someone new." The second time was about the motor response algorithm, where she actually knew more than he did, and she was right, and he said so without ceremony, and she looked briefly surprised by that. "You just agreed with me," she said. "You were right. People don't usually just say that." "That sounds exhausting," Noah said. She almost laughed. The sound she made was too short and too quickly controlled to properly qualify as laughter, but it was the cousin of it, and it changed the room. Mia showed up at 2:15. This time it wasn't because she'd followed Mrs. Kowalski's cat. It was because Noah had made the tactical error of mentioning, over breakfast, that the company building had a lobby with an indoor garden wall and a fountain, and Mia had apparently filed this information away and requested to be dropped off there after school by her friend's mother with the serene confidence of a child who had never been told no effectively enough to believe it applied to her. The security desk called upstairs with visible uncertainty. "There's a 7-year-old at the front requesting a Mr. Bennett. She says she has an appointment." Noah pressed his fingers to his forehead. "She does not have an appointment," he said. "She's very insistent, sir." Victoria from across the table said, "Send her up." "You don't have to." "I know." Victoria was already capping the whiteboard marker. "Send her up," she said again, to the phone. And then to Noah, "Does she ever do what you expect her to do?" "Occasionally," Noah said. "It surprises me every time." Mia arrived with her backpack and her rabbit and the immediate scanning attention of someone assessing a new environment for useful features. She spotted the chassis model within 15 seconds of walking in. "Is that the chair?" she asked Victoria, pointing. "A model of it. My current chair is the production version." Mia went and looked at the model with the focused, slightly aggressive attention she applied to anything mechanical. She was her father's daughter in this way. She had grown up watching Noah fix things, had sat on garage floors since she could walk while he explained how things worked, and the understanding had settled into her the way things settle into children who absorb them before they can be taught. The wheel part looks wrong, she said, after a moment. Victoria looked at Noah. Noah looked at the ceiling. Yeah, he said. That's kind of what we've been talking about. Mia nodded, satisfied that the adults were at least on the right track, and pulled a homework folder out of her backpack and sat down at the end of the conference table. I'll just do my homework, she said, with the munificence of someone granting a great favor. Victoria watched her for a moment. The small, serious face, the careful way she opened her folder, the rabbit propped against her backpack. Then she looked at Noah, and something in her expression was different from anything he'd seen there before. Softer, less calculated. He looked away first. They ate downstairs in the building's cafe at 4:30 because Mia announced she was hungry with the authority of someone accustomed to this announcement producing results. The cafe was nearly empty at that hour, a few stragglers from the afternoon shift, and they took a corner table and ordered sandwiches, and Mia ate half of hers and then told Victoria in considerable detail about a disagreement she'd had with a boy named Tyler at school who had said that girls couldn't be engineers. What did you tell him? Victoria asked. I told him my dad was an engineer and I was going to be a better one. She took another bite. Then I told him his backpack was ugly. The second part was unnecessary, Noah said. I know, Mia said, not looking up, but it felt good. Victoria made the not-quite laugh sound again. This time she didn't control it quite fast enough. Noah caught her eye across the table. She looked away, but her chin tilted slightly upward in the way of someone who has been caught being something other than what they usually present. They sat in the cafe until 5:30 when Noah said he needed to get Mia home for dinner and homework, and the comfortable drift of the afternoon hit the ordinary wall of logistics. He helped Mia into her jacket, repacked the homework folder that had migrated across the table, retrieved the rabbit from beneath Victoria's chair, where it had somehow ended up. At the door of the cafe, Victoria stopped beside him, and he stopped too, and for a moment they were standing, well, she was sitting, he was standing, in the late afternoon light of the lobby, the indoor garden wall green and quiet behind them. You're good at this, she said. At what? The work. The problem solving. She paused. You gave that up. I gave the career up, he said. The thinking doesn't go anywhere. I want to bring you back in on this, she said. Not as a favor, formally. I want your analysis on the full Apex redesign scope. He looked at her. You want to hire me? I want to consult you. We can call it whatever's comfortable. She said it evenly, without hesitation, but he'd spent enough time watching her face today to catch the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hands rested just a little too still on her lap. She wasn't comfortable asking. He didn't think she asked for things easily. Can I think about it? He said. Of course. It's not a no. I just need to think about the logistics, Mia's schedule, the other work. I understand. He nodded. He started to move toward the door, then he stopped and turned back. The threshold plate in the conference room corridor, he said. Third door on the left. It's raised about a centimeter more than it should be. I noticed you take the transition differently there. Victoria was quiet for a second. I've been navigating that plate for 2 years, she said. I know. Someone should fix it. I'll have maintenance. I can fix it right now, he said. Takes 5 minutes. You got a flathead screwdriver in this building? Victoria looked at him. The building was worth, he was fairly certain, somewhere in the range of several $100 million, and she was its chief executive, and he was offering to spend 5 minutes on a threshold plate. She opened her mouth. He expected her to say something dismissive, something that would restore the appropriate distance between them. Instead, she said, Third floor supply closet has tools. I'll show you. He fixed the threshold plate in 4 minutes. Mia held the flashlight without being asked. Victoria watched from the corridor and said nothing. On the way to the elevator afterward, Noah noticed Victoria take the conference room entrance without the slight lateral adjustment he'd watched her make twice earlier. She didn't comment on it, but her hands were relaxed on the wheels in a way they hadn't been before. He noticed. He didn't say anything. Some things didn't need to be said. But he called her Thursday morning before the school run, while Mia was upstairs looking for a shoe she had definitely left at the bottom of the stairs, and both of them knew it. I'll do the consultation, he said when she picked up. But I have terms. Of course you do, Victoria said. There was coffee in her voice, that particular early morning clarity. Go ahead. My hours are set around Mia's schedule, 7:30 school drop, 3:15 pickup, no flexibility on those. If a meeting runs over, I leave. Understood. If I think something is wrong with the design direction, I'll say so, even if it costs money, even if the board doesn't like it. That's why I'm hiring you. And I want to look at the pricing model for the Apex line, he said. Not just the engineering, the cost structure. A pause, longer than the previous ones. That's outside the engineering scope. I know, but the engineering scope and the pricing model are the same problem wearing different clothes. A better chair that costs $40,000 still fails the people who need it most. Another pause. He could hear her thinking, not hesitating. Victoria Sinclair didn't hesitate, but actually thinking, the gears of it. You're more difficult than you look, she said. My daughter says the same thing. Your daughter, Victoria said, and her voice had that different quality again, the softer one he was starting to recognize, is extremely perceptive. He heard Mia thundering down the stairs in a triumphant shout that suggested the shoe situation had resolved itself. We've got a deal then? He asked. We've got a deal, Victoria said. He hung up and turned to find Mia at the bottom of the stairs, one shoe on, one shoe in hand, looking at him with the particular expression she deployed when she knew something he hadn't told her yet. The chair lady? She said. I'm going to do some work for her company. Mia considered this. She sat on the bottom step and put her other shoe on with the studied casualness of someone who had formed an opinion and was deciding whether to share it. She's nice, Mia said finally. She doesn't talk to me like I'm little. She's not really a talk-down-to-people kind of person, Noah agreed. She was sad, though. Mia stood up, tested the shoe, pronounced it acceptable. When she thought nobody was looking, her face was sad. Noah looked at his daughter for a moment, the rabbit under her arm, the backpack listing to one side, the absolute uncomplicated accuracy of her observations. Yeah, he said. I know. We should fix that too, Mia said, and headed for the door. Noah stood in the hallway for a second after she'd gone out, in the particular quiet of a house that held one adult and one child and all the space where a third person used to be, and he thought about a woman who had learned to navigate a raised threshold plate for 2 years without telling anyone it bothered her. He thought, we should fix that too. Then he picked up his keys and went to take his daughter to school. The first 2 weeks at Sinclair Technologies were not what Noah had expected, though he hadn't expected much, which was probably why he kept being surprised. He came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days Mia had after-school care until 4. He was given a temporary workspace in a glass-walled office off the main engineering floor. A desk, a monitor, access to the technical files he needed. The engineers on the Apex team were polite to him in the way that people are polite to someone whose authority they haven't yet located. He was not their boss. He wasn't technically anything yet, just a consultant with a visitor badge and an opinion. They gave him the files he asked for and answered his questions with the careful minimalism of people waiting to see which way something fell. The files were worse than he'd expected, not the engineering itself. Sinclair's engineers were good, some of them very good. The problem was everything surrounding the engineering, the cost projections, the manufacturing constraints, the board memos that had accumulated over 2 development cycles like sediment, each one trimming something else from the original design vision until what remained was a good product that was no longer quite the product it had set out to be. He spent the first Tuesday reading. The second Thursday, he started writing. By the end of the second week, he had a document that was 17 pages long and that he was fairly certain was going to make several people in the building deeply unhappy. He brought it to Victoria on a Thursday afternoon, after the engineering floor had mostly cleared out. She was in her office on the top floor, a corner room with 2 glass walls and the city spread below it, and she was on a call when he knocked, but she waved him in and wrapped the call up within 2 minutes in a way that suggested she had been looking for an exit anyway. She read the document while he waited. She read fast. He'd noticed that about her, the way she moved through text, the way she moved through a room, efficiently, taking everything she needed. She didn't say anything for 7 minutes. He looked at the city out her window and let her read. You talked to the manufacturing team, she said finally. They talked to me, once they realized I wasn't there to file a report on them. And the board memos. Those were in the file access you gave me. She set the document on her desk and looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone confronting something they already knew and hadn't wanted confirmed in writing. The price point, she said. $38,000 for the base Apex model, Noah said. 44 for the power-assisted version. That's what's in the current projection. Our production costs? I know what your production costs are. I went through the manufacturing breakdown. He leaned forward in the chair across from her desk. Victoria, the median household income in this country is about $78,000 a year. A family in that range, with a member who needs this chair, before insurance, assuming they have insurance that covers adaptive equipment at all, is looking at spending more than half a month's pre-tax income on a single mobility device. And that's if they can get the insurance approval in the first place, which the data says takes an average of 4 months. Victoria's jaw was set. I know these numbers. Then you know the chair isn't reaching the people who need it most. We have a subsidy program that covers 8% of applicants. I checked. She was quiet. Outside her window, a plane crossed the sky, blinking slowly. The board's position, she said, is that premium pricing funds the R&D that makes the technology better for everyone over time. Trickle-down innovation. Trickle-down innovation, Noah said, is what you say when you want to charge $44,000 for something and feel okay about it. Victoria looked at him sharply. That's not fair, she said. No, he said. I know it's not. I know you didn't build this company to have a $44,000 price point. I read the founding documents, too. They were in the files. He paused. What you set out to build and what the board has let you build are not the same thing. The silence after that was a different kind of silence, the kind that sits in a room when something true has been said out loud that both people were already thinking. Victoria turned her chair toward the window. She sat looking at the city for a long moment, her hands quiet in her lap, and Noah watched the line of her shoulders, the set of them, the particular tension that he'd come to recognize as the shape of something she was holding. I had a version of this conversation with my lead investor 3 years ago, she said finally. He told me that idealism was a luxury of companies that didn't have shareholders. A pause. I didn't have a good answer for him. Do you have one now? I have a better question, she said, turning back. Her eyes were direct and level. Do you? He'd thought about this. He'd thought about it over 2 weeks of going through files, and he'd thought about it on the drive home at night with the radio low and Mia asleep in the back seat, and he'd thought about it in the particular space that opens up at 2 a.m. when everything else is quiet. There's a manufacturing partner in the Midwest, he said. Small company. They do assistive tech components. Family-owned. Their per-unit cost on the chassis elements is about 30% lower than your current supplier. Not because the quality is lower, I looked at their specs, but because they're not a publicly traded company optimizing for quarterly margins. They're a family that builds things. Victoria was watching him now with her full attention. There's also the modular question, he continued. The Apex is designed as an integrated system. If you broke it into modules, base frame, power assist, interface package, a user could buy the base at maybe $12,000 and add components as they can afford them or as their needs change. The engineering asks for it anyway, the wheelchair equivalent of being able to upgrade your phone without buying a new one. The board rejected the modular proposal in the second development cycle, Victoria said. I know, I read that memo too. The reasoning was that modular assembly increases support complexity. He paused. The reasoning wasn't wrong, but it weighted the company's convenience over the user's access. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You've been here 2 weeks, she said. I know. My senior engineers have been working on this for 3 years. I know that too. And you think you found the path through? I think I found a path, he said. I could be wrong about parts of it. I'm probably wrong about parts of it. But I think the question is worth asking, even if the answer turns out to be different from what I've got here. He nodded toward the document. I'm not trying to tell you how to run your company. Yes, you are, Victoria said. But the way she said it, not angry, almost amused, with that slight tilted quality at the corner of her mouth, suggested she was not entirely opposed to being told. A little bit, he admitted. She picked up the document again and flipped to the third section, the manufacturing analysis. She read a paragraph, turned a page, read another. He waited. The family-owned manufacturer, she said. You have contact information? Page 11. She turned to page 11. She read it. Then she set the document down again and looked at him and said, I'm going to set up a meeting with my executive team next week. I want you there. Okay. They're going to push back. I know. Some of them are going to be hostile about it. You're an outsider. You've been here 2 weeks and you're walking into a room and questioning decisions they spent 3 years defending. I've been in rooms like that before, Noah said. This room will be worse. Probably, he agreed. I'll be there anyway. Victoria looked at him with the assessing, recalibrating look he was getting used to. The one that meant she was updating her model of him, finding the previous version insufficient. Why? She said. Why what? Why does it matter to you? You're a consultant. You could hand me this document, collect your fee, and walk away. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about how to answer it honestly without making it sound like something it wasn't. My wife used a chair for the last year of her life, he said. Not an Apex, an older model, the kind that was available within our budget at the time. I watched her negotiate that chair every single day. The weight distribution, the terrain issues, all of it. I watched her spend energy on the equipment that she should have been able to spend on other things. He paused. I know what a better chair would have meant. I know exactly what it would have cost. And I know exactly what the gap was between that cost and what we could afford. So when I look at a $44,000 price point and an 8% subsidy coverage rate, it's not abstract to me. The office was very quiet. Victoria didn't say she was sorry. He hadn't wanted her to, and she seemed to understand that. She just looked at him with a steadiness that was its own kind of acknowledgement. Okay, she said softly. Next Wednesday, 10 o'clock. He nodded, picked up his jacket from the chair back. At the door, he paused. One more thing, he said. The executive team meeting. Can you get me the full cost model beforehand? Manufacturing to retail, every step. I'll have it sent tonight. Thank you. He was halfway through the door when she said his name. Noah? He turned. The chair your wife used, she said. What model? He told her. She nodded once, slowly, looking at something on her desk that he couldn't see from where he stood. I know that model, she said. He believed her. The executive meeting on Wednesday was exactly as bad as Victoria had warned him it would be. There were 7 people in the room besides Victoria and Noah. The CFO, 2 senior VPs, the head of product development, the head of engineering, the head of manufacturing partnerships, and a man named Gerald Holt, who was introduced as a board representative observing today's session, and who radiated, from the moment Noah walked in, the specific energy of someone who had already decided the meeting's outcome. Noah had been in difficult rooms before. He'd sat across from hospital administrators, explaining why the expensive adaptive equipment wasn't in the budget. He'd sat in insurance company offices waiting for someone to tell him which version of his wife's care was covered and which version was a luxury. He knew how power arranged itself in a room. He knew whose chairs were pulled closest to the table and whose were slightly back. He knew where to look when someone was speaking and they wanted you to look away. He put his copy of the 17-page document on the table and waited. Victoria opened the meeting. She gave Noah's background, the engineering credentials, the specialized experience, and she did it plainly, without overselling it, which he appreciated. Then she said she'd asked him to review the Apex development scope and that his findings were worth the team's attention, and she handed it to him. He talked for 20 minutes. He laid out the manufacturing cost analysis, the modular design proposal, the pricing accessibility problem. He used the numbers. He put them on the whiteboard, the actual arithmetic of who could and couldn't afford the current product, and he let the room sit with it. The pushback started before he'd finished. The CFO went first, politely, with the tone of someone explaining something to a person who meant well but didn't quite understand. The current pricing model was structured around recovery of R&D costs. The company had shareholders. The premium market funded the innovation pipeline. I understand that model, Noah said. I'm not arguing the company shouldn't be profitable. I'm arguing that the innovation pipeline has produced a product that most of the people who need it most can't access. We have a subsidy, 8% coverage, Noah said. I mentioned that. The subsidy program is expanding. To what coverage rate and on what timeline? Silence. Gerald Holt cleared his throat. He was a heavy man in his 60s, with the particular stillness of someone who had been powerful long enough not to need to move quickly. Mr. Bennett, he said, I appreciate the thoroughness of your analysis, but I think there may be a fundamental misunderstanding here about the company's strategic positioning. What's the misunderstanding? Sinclair Technologies is a premium product company. That's not incidental. It's the foundation of our brand equity and our investor positioning. A modular, lower-cost product line isn't a modification of our strategy. It's a different company. It's a different pricing tier, Noah said. Other industries manage multiple tiers without losing brand equity. Nobody thinks Apple's whole product line is cheap because they sell older iPhone models at lower prices. Holt looked at him with the patient expression of a man explaining something for the last time. We're not Apple. No, Noah said. Apple makes phones. You make equipment that people need to move through the world. He paused. That's not a lesser product category. That's a higher obligation. The room was very quiet. Noah was aware, without looking, that Victoria had gone still in the way she went still when she was paying particular attention. He was also aware that the head of engineering, a woman named Dr. Soo-yeon Park, who had said very little so far, was looking at her own copy of the document with an expression that was not hostile. Holt opened his mouth. Victoria said quietly, "Gerald." Something in the way she said it made him close it. "I'd like to hear from Soo-yeon," Victoria said. Dr. Park looked up from the document. She was in her early 40s, with the particular economy of expression of someone who had learned to choose her moments. She looked at Noah. "The modular chassis proposal," she said. "You're suggesting the base frame separates from the power assist interface at a single junction point. With a secondary lock here." He showed her on the whiteboard. "The load bearing on the secondary lock at full assist power needs testing," he said. "I know. That's in the document. I'm not saying it's a solved problem. I'm saying it's a solvable problem." She looked at him. Then she looked at Victoria. "It's a solvable problem," she said. The air in the room changed in a small but definite way. The head of manufacturing partnerships leaned slightly forward. The CFO looked at his copy of the document with an expression that was no longer purely dismissive. Holt said, "Victoria, I want to flag that this discussion is moving in a direction that I heard you, Gerald." Victoria's voice was level and absolute. "I'd like the team to continue." The meeting ran for another 90 minutes. By the end, no decisions had been made. That wasn't how these things worked, and Noah knew it. But Dr. Park had agreed to a technical feasibility review on the modular proposal. The head of manufacturing partnerships had said he was willing to take a call with the Midwestern supplier Noah had identified, and two of the VPs who had been quietly hostile at the start were quietly less so by the end. Holt left without speaking to Noah. The CFO shook his hand, which meant something and nothing at the same time. "Doctor," Park handed him her card and said, "Send me the load-bearing calculations." And that meant something real. In the hallway afterward, once the room had emptied, Victoria fell into step beside him, her wheels quiet on the corridor floor. "You held your ground," she said. "So did Holt." "Holt will always hold his ground. That's what the board pays him for." A pause. "He'll be a problem." "I know. Are you bothered by that?" Noah thought about it honestly. "Not really," he said. "Problems in rooms I can handle. I'm less good at the kind that follows you home." She glanced at him. "What kind is that?" He was quiet for a moment. "The kind where you can't fix anything, where the problem isn't structural or mechanical, it's just time passing, things changing, people leaving." He hadn't meant to say it quite that plainly. It was the kind of thing that slipped out when you'd been focused on a hard problem all morning and your guard was down and someone asked the right question. Victoria didn't answer immediately. They'd reached the elevator. She pressed the button and they waited. "Yeah," she said finally. Her voice was lower. "I know that kind." The elevator opened. They rode down in the particular quiet of two people who have said something real and are letting it settle. In the lobby, Mia was sitting on the bench near the fountain with her backpack and her rabbit, eating a granola bar with the air of someone who had been waiting a perfectly reasonable amount of time and was prepared to wait more. "How'd it go?" she asked, looking from one to the other. "Complicated," Noah said. "Did you fix it?" "Working on it." Mia considered this and took another bite of granola bar. "That's okay," she said. "Most things take more than one try." Victoria looked at her. Then she looked at Noah, and whatever was in her face in that moment, some combination of tiredness and something else, something warmer, she let him see it before she looked away. "She's right," Victoria said. "She usually is," Noah said. "It's humbling." Mia stood up and shouldered her backpack. Can we get tacos? She asked. I've been thinking about tacos since math class. Victoria made the sound that was almost a laugh. There's a place 2 blocks over, she said. They're good. Noah looked at her. You don't have to. He started. Stop saying that, she said. I know I don't have to. Are you coming or not? Mia was already headed for the door. Noah looked at Victoria for one moment in the gold afternoon light of the lobby, the city moving beyond the glass behind her, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Not yet, but the shape of the space where happiness could fit if he let it. Yeah, he said. We're coming. And the 3 of them went out into the afternoon together, the city loud and warm around them, and it wasn't perfect and it wasn't simple. And there was a board representative named Gerald Holt who was going to be a problem in a pricing model that wasn't fixed yet, and a 17-page document that had only opened the door to a longer fight. But Mia was talking about tacos, and Victoria was listening, and for the first time in years, Noah Bennett walked out of a building after a hard day and didn't feel entirely alone. The taco place 2 blocks from Sinclair Technologies became a regular thing, though nobody officially decided that. It just happened the way certain things happen between people who are circling something they haven't named yet. Incrementally, with plausible deniability, each individual instance feeling casual enough that no one had to acknowledge the pattern it was forming. 3 Thursdays in a row, after Noah's consulting hours, the 3 of them ended up at the same corner booth with the same order. Carnitas for Noah, chicken for Victoria, Mia rotating through the menu with the systematic curiosity of someone conducting research. The staff started recognizing them. The woman at the counter, a stout and unsentimental person named Bev, stopped asking if they wanted the kids' menu for Mia after the second visit, when Mia told her with considerable dignity that she preferred the adult portion of the street corn. Outside of Thursdays, other things accumulated. Victoria started texting Noah links to engineering papers. Not always about the Apex project, sometimes just things she'd found interesting, technical pieces on material science or urban accessibility design. He texted back, usually with 1 or 2 sentences, occasionally with a paragraph when the paper touched something he had a real opinion about. She appreciated that he didn't pad the responses. She had enough people in her life who padded responses. Mia had somehow acquired Victoria's direct number, nobody could explain exactly when this had happened, and used it sporadically to send photos of things she found mechanically interesting. A bicycle repair she'd watched Noah do in the driveway. A diagram she'd drawn of what she thought an improved wheelchair wheel hub should look like, in crayon, with labels. Victoria responded to everyone. She kept the crayon diagram in her desk drawer, which she did not mention to anyone. One Saturday in October, Victoria found herself at a park in the Crestwood neighborhood because Mia had a soccer game, and Noah had mentioned it in passing on Thursday, and Mia had then mentioned it not at all in passing, directly, specifically, with a look that brooked no ambiguity, on Friday via text. The park had an accessible path that looped the perimeter of the field. Victoria had taken it twice before Mia scored her 1 goal of the season and pointed directly at Victoria in the bleachers, well, at the edge of the field, where Victoria had positioned herself. And it was the unself-conscious, absolute certainty of the gesture that had hit Victoria somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She'd looked at Noah. He was already looking at her. Neither of them said anything. Mia was already running back to her team. The work at Sinclair Technologies was harder and slower than any of them would have liked. Dr. Park's feasibility review on the modular chassis came back positive in mid-October, with 17 technical caveats and a timeline that the manufacturing team said was aggressive and Noah said was realistic if they stopped over-engineering the junction interface. The Midwestern manufacturer, a company called Reinhold Fabrication, run by a man named Carl Reinhold, who had started it with his brother in a warehouse outside Columbus 20 years ago, sent a sample component set that Dr. Park's team tested for 2 weeks and declared better than expected. Gerald Holt sent 3 memos in October. 2 were addressed to Victoria, and 1 was addressed to the full board. The substance of all 3 was the same. The modular proposal represented a strategic risk to the company's market positioning, and a consultant with no current industry credentials should not be driving product development decisions at a $4 billion company. Victoria forwarded the 3rd memo to Noah without comment. He read it at his kitchen table after Mia was in bed, the house quiet around him, the particular nighttime quiet of a small house where a lot of life happened. He read it twice. Then he typed back, "Is this a problem I should be worried about?" Her response took 12 minutes. "It's a problem I'm managing. Don't let it change what you're doing." He put the phone down and sat with that for a while. He'd been in places before where someone had said I'm handling it and meant I don't actually have a plan. He didn't think Victoria meant that, but the memo was not nothing. Holt had board access and board relationships and the specific kind of institutional gravity that came from being the person who controlled whether the funding continued. He thought about what it would mean to walk away from the project now, collect what he was owed, go back to the handyman work, the plumbing estimates, the Tuesday math tutoring. He thought about whether that would feel like safety or like a particular kind of failure he'd recognize from other points in his life. The moment where the harder, more honest path was available, and he'd taken the easier one instead. He went to bed without deciding anything, which was its own kind of decision. The thing with Victoria happened on a Wednesday, the kind of gray mid-October Wednesday that couldn't make up its mind about rain. He'd come in early. Mia had a school field trip that meant an early drop and no afternoon pickup requirement, and he'd gone straight to the engineering floor to work with Dr. Park's team on the junction interface problem. By noon, they'd resolved 2 of the 17 technical caveats and opened a new one that was more interesting than either of the ones they'd closed. And Noah had the particular buzzing focus of someone who'd been handed a problem that fit the specific shape of their mind. He was so deep in it that he didn't notice the time until Dr. Park said, at 1:15, that she had a board presentation in 40 minutes and needed to prep. He gathered his papers and went upstairs to the workroom, expecting to find it empty. Victoria was there. She was at the window, not working, her laptop closed on the table beside her. She was looking at the city with the focused, unfocused gaze of someone not really seeing what they're looking at. She didn't hear him come in. "Sorry," he said. "I can use the other room." "No, stay." She turned. Something was off. Not visibly wrong, not in any way a stranger would have noticed, but he'd spent enough time watching her face to read the register of it. She was tired in a way that went past the physical. He sat down. He didn't ask if she was okay. He'd learned that Victoria Sinclair did not find that question useful. Instead, he opened his folder and looked at the junction interface notes and waited. After a while, she said, "Holt's calling for a full board review of the modular project. Formal vote. He has 2 other board members behind him." "When?" 3 weeks. "What's the likely outcome?" "Unclear." Her hands rested on her lap in that particular too-still way. "If it goes to a vote, I need 4 of 7 board members. I have 2 I'm confident in, 1 who's genuinely undecided, and 3 who are currently listening to Gerald." What changed his timeline? "The Reinhold component tests came back," she said. "The results were better than his talking points assumed, so he moved from slow erosion to direct action." Noah turned a pen in his hand. Outside, the city was muffled by the cloud cover, gray and close. "Is there a version of this where you lose the vote and the project survives?" he asked. "No. Flat. If the board votes it down, it's dead, and I'd be in a significantly weakened position for anything else I wanted to push." "Okay." He set the pen down. "What do you need from me?" She looked at him. The question seemed to land differently than she'd expected. She'd been braced, he thought, for reassurance, or strategy, or some version of, "I'm sure it'll be fine." The direct question appeared to require a recalibration. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's okay. Think about it." They worked for 2 hours side by side at the long table, the city gray and close outside, not talking much. The easy quiet of people who had learned each other's working rhythms, who no longer felt the need to fill space. At some point, she made coffee without asking if he wanted any and put a cup at his elbow, and he said thanks without looking up. And it was the kind of small, ordinary moment that carries more weight than it should because of what surrounds it. At 4 o'clock, she said, without looking up from her screen, "I'm scared of losing this." He was quiet. "The project," she said. Then, after a pause, "And other things." He looked at her. She was still looking at her screen, but she wasn't reading it. Her eyes were too still for reading. "What other things?" he said. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Since the accident," she said, "I've been very good at making sure I don't need things I can't control, people included." A pause. It's a reasonable adaptation. I know it's also not the only way to live. He didn't say anything. He waited. The last time I needed someone, she said, was Callum, and you saw how that ended. I saw about 30 seconds of how that ended, Noah said. In a restaurant. I don't know the whole story. The whole story is that I let someone in, and when things became complicated, when I became complicated, he decided the version of me before the accident was the person he'd signed up for, and the person after was someone else's problem. She said it without self-pity, in the flat recounting voice of something that had been examined so many times it had lost its raw edges. He didn't leave right away. He stayed for 8 months being kind about it, which was almost worse. Yeah, Noah said quietly. Kind about it is almost worse. She looked at him then, really looked, the direct, full-attention gaze that she usually deployed in arguments or assessments, turned now on something that wasn't a problem to be solved. You know that from experience, she said. People were very kind after my wife died, he said, for about 6 months. After that, the kindness had we've been very patient and you should probably be moving forward by now quality, which is also almost worse in a different way. How did you handle it? I didn't, especially. I just kept going. Got Mia to school, paid the bills, did the work. He paused. Eventually, the keeping going turned into something more like actually living. I'm not sure exactly when that happened. Victoria was quiet. I think I skipped that part, she said. Which part? The keeping going turning into something else. She looked at her hands. I think I got very good at the keeping going and then just stayed there. He didn't argue with it. He thought she was probably right. It's not too late, he said. She made a small, skeptical sound. I'm not saying that as a comfort thing, he said. I mean it mechanically. It's not too late because you're still here and the other things you need are still available. That's all that too late requires. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Several things at once, none of them simple. You're a strange man, Noah Bennett. You're not the first person to say that. I imagine not. Something shifted in her face. Does it scare you? This, a gesture that encompassed the room, the table, the space between them. Whatever this is, he thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said, somewhat. What part? The part where I haven't done this since Sarah. I've been Mia's dad for 3 years, almost entirely. That's felt like enough. It felt like what I was supposed to be focused on. He paused. And then you were just there. And you were... He stopped. What? She asked. Quiet. Real, he said. You were just real, in a way that made the distance feel like the wrong direction. The words sat in the room. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the gray October sky had finally made up its mind and it started to rain, slow and steady against the glass. I don't know how to do this well, she said. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't either, he said. I haven't in a long time. I have a tendency to shut down when I feel cornered, she said, even by good things, especially by good things. I'll push back and I'll get cold and I'll make it very logical and I'll tell myself I'm being sensible. I have a tendency to convince myself I'm fine when I'm not, he said. And then one day Mia says something at breakfast and I realize I haven't been fine for several weeks and I've been making sandwiches about it. Victoria looked at him. Making sandwiches about it? When I'm not okay, I make elaborate sandwiches. Mia says the sandwich complexity is directly correlated to how much I'm avoiding something. She has a chart. Victoria stared at him for a beat. Then she made the sound. The real one. Not the controlled cousin of it, but the actual laugh. Short and unguarded and completely unmanaged. And it changed her whole face. And Noah thought, there it is. She pressed a hand over her mouth like she could take it back. She couldn't. Your daughter, she said, is keeping a chart of your emotional state via sandwich analysis. I found it in October of last year, he said. It went back 8 months. It was very accurate. Victoria was still trying to recover her composure and not entirely succeeding. That's the most alarming and also somehow the most reassuring thing I've heard in months. She's a remarkable kid. She really is. The laughter had ebbed. Something softer had settled in its place. She told me something once, a few weeks ago, when you'd gone to get coffee. She said, Victoria paused, pressing her lips together. She said, my dad smiles differently when you're around. He smiles like he used to. The rain moved against the glass. Noah didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't tell me she said that, he said. She asked me not to tell you for a while. She thought you needed to get there on your own. A pause. I've been holding it for 3 weeks. He looked at the table. He looked at the rain. He looked at Victoria Sinclair, who had told him she didn't know how to do this well and had told him the truth about the ways she would fail at it, and was sitting in the gray October afternoon with her hands in her lap and the real laughter still faintly visible in the lines around her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Whatever the board does, whatever happens with Holt, I'm not going anywhere. Her jaw tightened slightly, not against the words, but against the reaction to them, the habit of not letting things land. You don't know what you're signing up for, she said. Probably not all of it, he agreed, but enough. I'm difficult, she said. I've noticed. I'm controlling and I overwork and I don't ask for help easily, and I have a board member who is actively trying to bury a project that you and I have both put a lot into and that may blow up in both our faces in 3 weeks. Yeah, Noah said. And you're still here, he said. Yeah. She looked at him. The rain was steady. The city outside was soft and blurred through the wet glass, all the hard edges dissolved. She didn't take his hand. She didn't move toward him. She was Victoria Sinclair, and she moved carefully and at her own pace, and those were not failures. Those were just the particular way she was shaped, and he understood that. But she didn't look away either. Okay, she said, finally, quietly. Okay. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a beginning with a clear timestamp. It was just a door that had been standing closed for a long time, and someone had finally tried the handle, and it turned out it wasn't locked. Mia knew before he told her. He picked her up from school that afternoon. She'd gotten a ride home from a classmate's parent, and she was already in the kitchen eating cereal when he came in, still damp from the rain. And she looked at him for about 3 seconds with the patient, watchful attention of a 7-year-old who had been keeping a sandwich chart for 8 months. You talked to her, Mia said. We had a conversation, yeah. A real conversation. A real one. Mia ate another spoonful of cereal. She appeared to be processing. Then she said, Are you okay? And he thought about the question. He thought about the board vote in 3 weeks, and Gerald Holt, and the modular project, and the 17-page document, and the weight distribution problem, and the pricing model, and all the things that weren't fixed yet and might not be. He thought about a woman who laughed like she was surprised by it every time. He thought about being real, about the distance feeling like the wrong direction. Yeah, he said, I'm okay. Mia studied his face with the thoroughness of someone checking her work. Good, she said, and went back to her cereal. Outside, the rain was still coming down. Inside, the kitchen was warm and the light was on, and Noah stood in the middle of it and felt, not fixed, not healed, not any of the clean words, but present. Fully, undeniably present in his own life in a way that had been missing for a while. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The 3 weeks before the board vote were the longest 3 weeks Noah could remember since the last year of Sarah's life, which was its own kind of measurement. The kind you don't choose, but that your mind reaches for anyway when it needs to locate the weight of something. He kept coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He kept working with Dr. Park's team on the junction interface, which had resolved 14 of the original 17 technical caveats, and was now down to 3 stubborn problems that required testing rather than thinking. He kept having the taco place dinners on Thursdays, though the atmosphere had changed, not worse, but more weighted, the way air feels before a weather system arrives. Everyone knew what was coming. The board vote had a date now, November 14th. 3 Thursdays away, then 2, then 1. Victoria was in meetings constantly. She was working the undecided board member, a woman named Diane Faust, who had made her money in pharmaceutical distribution and who asked very precise questions and gave very little away. Victoria reported on these conversations to Noah in the sparse, factual way she reported on everything, but he could read the tension in the brevity of the texts, the slight lag in the response times that meant she was running on too much coffee and too little sleep. He made her eat lunch twice, by the simple method of appearing in her office doorway at noon with food from the cafe downstairs, and the particular expression of a man who was not going to be argued with about sandwiches. She complained both times. She ate both times. Mia sent her a photo of the crayon wheelchair diagram, newly revised with annotations, because Mia had apparently decided that the original design had been insufficiently detailed. Victoria texted back, "The load distribution on the rear axle is still wrong." Mia texted back, "I know I'm working on it." Noah found this exchange on Mia's tablet and stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at it with the particular feeling of a person watching two important things in his life communicate directly with each other, bypassing him entirely and finding it more right than alarming. The night before the vote, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark of his bedroom and listened to the house and thought about all the things he'd gotten wrong over the years, all the moments where he'd chosen safety over honesty or silence over the harder conversation. He thought about the version of himself that had existed before Sarah got sick, the engineer with the career trajectory and the clear professional future. And he thought about whether that person would recognize the man lying awake in a small house in Crestwood at 2 a.m, worrying about a board vote at a company he had no official stake in for a project that mattered to him in ways he hadn't fully expected when he'd walked into a wrong restaurant on a Friday night almost 4 months ago. He thought, "I don't know if I'd recognize him, but I think I like this version better." It wasn't a comfortable thought. The comfortable version would have been the opposite. The reassurance of continuity, the story where nothing essential is lost. But comfort and truth were not the same thing, and he was old enough now, tired enough, to know the difference. He fell asleep at 3. Mia woke him at 7:15 by opening his bedroom door and saying, "You have your worried face. Eat breakfast." Victoria called him at 4:17 in the afternoon on November 14th. He was fixing a dripping faucet in a house in the Millbrook neighborhood, which was the kind of irony the universe apparently found satisfying. A man on his knees under a sink, wrench in hand, paint on his jacket, getting the call that would determine whether the most significant professional work he'd done in 5 years survived or got voted into a filing cabinet. He answered on the second ring. "It passed," Victoria said. He sat back against the cabinet under the sink and closed his eyes. 4-3, she said. Diane Faust voted yes. What changed her mind? I asked her to spend an hour reading user feedback from the current Apex customers, not the curated summary the product team puts in the quarterly report, the actual raw feedback, the full text submissions. A pause. She called me the next morning and said she hadn't slept well. That'll do it. Holt has lodged a formal objection with the board chair. He'll keep pushing. Her voice was level. But the vote is the vote. The modular project has been approved for full development. I'm naming a division head for it next week. He waited. I want it to be you, she said. Formally. Full-time. Not a consultant. He was quiet under someone else's sink, in a house in Millbrook with a wrench in his hand. Victoria, I know it's a significant change from what you've been doing. I know it affects your schedule and Mia's routine. I know you'll want to think about it. A pause. I also know you've been doing the work of this role for 4 months already, and I know the project needs someone who cares about it the way you care about it. Those two things are not easy to find in the same person. He turned the wrench over in his hand. The faucet dripped above him, slow and patient. Let me talk to Mia, he said. Of course. And I'll want the terms in writing before I decide. Already drafted? He almost laughed. You drafted the terms before you called me. I drafted them last week, she said without apology. I was fairly confident about the vote. Were you? A beat. No, she said quietly. I wasn't, but drafting the terms was something I could control, so I did it anyway. He understood that completely. It was, he thought, one of the most honest things she'd ever said to him. I'll call you tonight, he said. Okay. He finished the faucet. The drip stopped on the second adjustment, which felt like the universe maintaining some basic continuity, and drove to Mia's school for pickup, with the call still sitting in his chest like a stone that hadn't decided yet whether it was the good kind or the bad kind. Mia got in the car and looked at him. Something happened, she said. The vote passed. The project is approved. And? He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was watching him with her mother's eyes. Victoria wants me to lead the division? Full-time. It would change our schedule. More regular hours, which is actually better than what we have now, but a bigger commitment. less flexibility for some things. Mia considered this with the seriousness she applied to important matters. Would you be doing work you care about? She asked. Yeah, I think so. Would you be happy? He thought about that. I think I'd be working towards something real. That's the closest I get to happy with work. Okay, she said. Then you should do it. She looked out the window. Can I keep texting Victoria about the wheelchair design? That's up to her. I already asked her. She said yes. Mia turned back with the serenity of someone whose logistics are in order. Can we have tacos tonight? He took the job. The formal announcement came in the last week of November, an internal memo that went to the full company followed by an external press release that described the new Sinclair Adaptive Technologies division, the Access Initiative, they'd called it, after a long argument between Noah, Dr. Park, and Victoria in a conference room with cold coffee, and named Noah Bennett as its director. The press release also described the modular design approach, the Reinhold fabrication partnership, and the projected price point for the base model, $11,400, with power assist and interface packages available separately. It was not cheap. Noah was not going to pretend it was cheap, but it was less than a third of the current Apex base price, and it had a realistic path to insurance coverage in a way the current pricing never had, and that meant something concrete for a specific number of families who would otherwise have gone without. Gerald Holt resigned from the board 2 weeks after the vote. He sent a letter that was professional and cold, and Victoria read it once, put it in a folder, and didn't mention it again. The work that followed was not glamorous. It was long meetings and technical reviews and manufacturing negotiations and the slow, grinding process of turning a proposal into a production timeline. Noah drove to Columbus twice to meet Carl Reinhold in person, a compact, precise man in his 60s who shook Noah's hand with both of his and said, "We've been waiting for someone to call us who actually read our specs, and who had a photo on his office wall of his daughter in an early Sinclair Technologies chair taken 15 years ago, which he'd never mentioned in any of the negotiations because it wasn't a negotiating point, it was just the reason he'd built the company." Noah stood in front of that photo for a while. Carl Reinhold stood next to him and didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Dr. Park turned out to be one of the best working relationships of Noah's professional life. She was meticulous and honest and argued well, meaning she argued until the technical evidence pointed somewhere and then moved there without resentment. They resolved the last 3 junction interface caveats in December, in a session that ran until 9 at night and ended with Dr. Park saying, "That's it, that's the fix," in a tone of such pure relief that the 2 other engineers in the room actually applauded. Noah texted Victoria, "Junction interface is solved." She texted back within 30 seconds, "I know, Su-Yan already called me." She was crying a little. Good crying or bad crying? The kind that happens when something that has been wrong for 3 years is finally right. He put his phone in his pocket and stood in the emptied engineering room and felt the particular satisfaction of a problem solved. Not euphoria, not triumph, just the solid, quiet sense of a thing being where it was supposed to be. Christmas arrived the way it always arrived in Noah's house. Abruptly, with Mia having opinions. The tree went up the first weekend of December because Mia considered waiting until later in December an act of willful deprivation. The ornaments were a mix of store-bought and handmade, the handmade ones accumulating over 7 years like a record of Mia's evolving interests and motor skills. Popsicle stick frames with school photos, a clay handprint from kindergarten, a small cardboard engineer's helmet she'd made herself at age 6 and labeled MIA's hat in careful letters. Noah stood in front of the tree on a Tuesday evening while Mia was in the bath and thought about Christmases. The first one after Sarah died had been the hardest. The second had been more manageable. The third, last year, had been okay in the way that okay meant you got through it, and there were moments that were genuinely good, and only some of the time did you reach for someone who wasn't there anymore. He was aware, standing in front of the tree, that this one had the potential to feel different, and that the potential both moved him and scared him in roughly equal measure. He called Victoria. She answered on the 3rd ring with the slightly distracted quality of someone emerging from work. "Hold on," she said, and he heard the soft sound of a laptop closing. "Okay. Hi." "Hi." He looked at the tree. "What are you doing for Christmas?" A pause. "Why?" "Mia wants to know if you want to come for dinner. She's been working up to asking you directly, but she thought I should check first. She thought you should check first, Victoria repeated. I think she was being considerate of your schedule. She also may have been hedging against rejection, but she'd never admit that. A longer pause. Noah? Yeah. I haven't done Christmas with... I don't really do Christmas with people. My assistant usually sends a gift basket situation, and I work through most of it. I know, he said. You don't have to. I'm asking. The pause this time had a different texture. He'd learned to read her pauses the way you learn to read any landscape you've spent enough time in, each one slightly different, conveying different things. What time? She said. Whenever you want. Mia will be up at an hour that is technically still night, so the day is long. Something in her voice shifted. Not quite the laugh, but the thing that preceded it, warm and unguarded. I'll come for dinner, 6 o'clock. We'll see you then. He hung up and Mia appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, hair damp, rabbit underarm, with the expression of someone who had heard the last 30 seconds of a phone conversation and required confirmation. She's coming, Mia said. 6 o'clock. Mia descended the stairs with great dignity and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. And as she passed him, she patted his arm once, twice, with the patronizing affection of a 7-year-old who has decided the adults in her life are finally catching up. Christmas dinner was loud and imperfect and exactly right in all the ways that matter. Mia had decided to help cook, which meant the kitchen had been more chaotic than it needed to be. And the green beans were slightly overcooked because nobody had been watching them during the 40-minute debate about whether the mashed potatoes needed more butter, and Noah had burned his hand on the oven rack getting the chicken out. A minor burn, nothing serious, but Mia had produced the first aid kit with the gravity of someone managing a crisis and stood by while Victoria, who it turned out was calm and efficient in minor medical situations, had cleaned and bandaged it with brisk competence. You've done that before, he said, watching her. I had a period after the accident where I had to be very familiar with medical procedures, she said. She smoothed the edge of the bandage. It turns out being independent about physical care is a skill you can learn. I learned it out of necessity, and then just kept it. He looked at her hands on his. She looked up. Neither of them moved for a moment. Okay, Mia said from the other side of the kitchen. The green beans are ready. Can someone pay attention to dinner? They ate at the kitchen table, all three of them, in the warm, disorganized way of people who are not performing dinner, but actually having it. Mia talking about her plan to redesign the school's playground equipment in terms of accessibility, Victoria asking precise and genuinely interested questions, Noah watching the two of them and eating his slightly overcooked green beans and feeling the particular quality of a moment that was ordinary in the best possible sense of the word. After dinner, Mia fell asleep on the couch with remarkable speed, the rabbit on her chest, the tree lights making slow, warm patterns on her face. Noah covered her with the blanket from the armchair. He stood looking at her for a moment in the way parents stand looking at sleeping children, something between gratitude and awe, and the ache of knowing they'll be grown before you're ready. He turned around. Victoria was watching him from across the room, in the low light of the tree. She does that, he said. Falls asleep like a switch gets thrown. I know, I've seen it before. A pause. You're good with her. She's easy to be good with. She's not actually, Victoria said. She's challenging and she's opinionated and she argues with logic that doesn't always follow, but that she delivers with such conviction that you find yourself reconsidering. A pause. She's easy to love. That's different from easy. He crossed the room and sat on the couch opposite her. The tree lights were the only ones on in the room. Outside, the street was quiet and cold. Victoria, he said. Yeah. I want to say something, and I don't want you to deflect it into a logical analysis. She looked at him. That's a very specific request. I know your tendencies. You do, she said quietly. He looked at her in the tree light, the particular way she looked when the armor was down, when the controlled precision of her public self had relaxed into something less managed. He had seen this version of her accumulate slowly over 4 months, in small increments, and he understood it was a thing she had built, the openness, the willingness to be seen, not something that had always been there waiting, but something she was choosing, repeatedly, against her instincts. I'm in love with you, he said. I want you to know that. Not as a transition to something else, not building to a question. Just, I wanted you to know. The room was very quiet. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were still in her lap. Her jaw was set in the particular way it's set when she was holding something in. I'm going to be difficult, she said. I know. Not as a metaphor, specifically. I'll shut down when I'm scared. I'll overwork. I'll make things logical when they shouldn't be logical. I'll need more time than feels reasonable for certain things. I'll have bad days related to the accident and the chair and what my body is and isn't, and on those days I will not be gracious about it. Okay, he said. That's not a small thing. I know it's not. He held her gaze. I'm not looking for small, and I'm not looking for easy. I had a good marriage for a while, and it was hard in the ways real things are hard. I know what I'm signing up for, not all the specifics, but the category. She looked down at her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were slightly brighter than they'd been, which was the closest Victoria Sinclair came to showing that something had gotten through. I'm in love with you too, she said. I want to be equally direct about it because I think you deserve that. He didn't move toward her. He didn't need to, not yet. The words were enough for right now, substantial and real, and sitting in the room between them like something you could hold. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Across the room, Mia slept on, undisturbed, the rabbit rising and falling with her breath. The Access Initiative's public launch was on the second Saturday of March, at a gala held in the main atrium of the Sinclair Technologies building, the same building where Noah had fixed a threshold plate with a flathead screwdriver 5 months earlier. And the irony of that was not lost on him as he stood in the atrium in the closest thing to a suit he owned, which was a dark blazer over dark pants that Mia had approved after critical inspection. The atrium had been transformed. There were round tables and low lighting and a stage at the far end. And the guest list included the engineering team and the manufacturing partners, and a number of people who worked at disability advocacy organizations and who had been consultants on the Access Initiative's design process from the early stages. Not as a gesture, but as a functional necessity, because Noah had insisted on it in the same meeting where he'd insisted on the pricing model, and Victoria had agreed in the same breath. Carl Reinhold was there with his wife and his daughter, who was 22 now, in a newer chair, and who shook Noah's hand with the direct, warm grip of someone who understood exactly what the evening represented without needing it explained. Dr. Park was there in a dress that appeared to surprise her colleagues, who apparently only saw her in lab coats, and she had a look on her face that Noah recognized from the night the junction interface was solved. The look of someone in the presence of a thing they helped make and are trying to let themselves feel good about. Danny Ruiz was there. The reason for all of it, in the technical sense, the man who had stood in a hospital room 4 months before his son was born and called in a favor that had rewritten the next year of Noah's life. He came with his wife and with a small boy named Marcus, who was 6 months old and already, according to Danny, exhibiting the early signs of his father's talent for complicating situations. Danny hugged Noah too long and said, "I told you," into his shoulder, and Noah said, "You didn't tell me anything, you panicked." And Danny said, "I told you by instinct." And Noah told him he was the worst person in his life, and Danny said, "I know, you're welcome." Victoria found Noah at the side of the atrium 20 minutes before the program began. She was in a dress the color of deep water, and her hair was down, and she had the contained, precise quality she always had in public settings. But she was watching him as she came across the room with a warmth in it that she no longer bothered to manage. "Ready?" she said. "No," he said honestly. "Are you?" "I've been ready for this for 6 years," she said. "I'm terrified." "That seems right." "Stop being reasonable about it." "You first." She almost smiled, the real kind, the whole one, that she'd been letting through more often in recent months, and that still caught him off guard in the best possible way. "Mia is with Danny's wife," she said. "She's been explaining to Marcus that he should start learning about mechanical engineering as early as possible. Marcus is 6 months old. She said it's not too early to establish foundational concepts." Noah pressed his hand over his mouth. "She also," Victoria continued, "told me before you got here that she thinks Marcus is going to need a taco intervention at some point tonight, meaning she wants tacos after this." "She's 7, Noah said. "How does she manage everything?" "Better than either of us," Victoria said. "That's what I've concluded." The program started on time, which surprised no one who had ever worked with Victoria Sinclair's event logistics. There were 3 speakers before her: the head of the Disability Advocacy Coalition, Carl Reinhold, and Dr. Park, who spoke for 4 minutes with the precision of someone who has cut a speech down from 20 minutes and is proud of every word she removed. Then Victoria wheeled to the stage and the room went quiet. She spoke for 11 minutes. Noah had read the speech. She'd shown him a draft the week before in the conference room where they'd first worked at the whiteboard together, and he'd suggested 2 changes, and she'd made one of them and argued him out of the other, and he'd admitted she was probably right. But hearing it delivered in front of 300 people in a room that had gone completely still was something different from reading it on a page. She talked about what the company had been built to do and the distance between that intention and the product that had emerged from 6 years of board compromises and market positioning. She talked about the gap between innovation and access, and about who bore the cost of that gap, and about the specific nameable families who would be able to afford a mobility device now who couldn't have afforded one last year. She talked about what it meant to build something that served the people who needed it, not just the people who could pay for the premium version. And then she talked about Noah. Not sentimentally, not with the language of rescue or transformation. She talked about him the way she talked about the Reinhold partnership or the modular design proposal, as a thing that had changed the trajectory of a problem she'd been working on for years, with specificity and directness and the acknowledgement that the change had been real and had cost something and had been worth it. He walked into this building as a consultant, she said, with a 17-page document and a willingness to say the things that were inconvenient to say. He was right about most of it. He argued well about the parts where he was wrong. He fixed a threshold plate in the corridor on the 3rd floor that I'd been navigating around for 2 years. And he did it because he noticed it bothered me and had the tools in the car. A pause. That's the version of engineering I believe in. You notice what's wrong. You have the tools. You fix it. Not because it's a grand gesture, but because the threshold plate is just wrong and someone's been accommodating it longer than they should have. She looked out at the room. The Access Initiative exists because a group of people decided that acceptable parameters were not actually acceptable. That's the whole story. Everything else is math. The room applauded. Noah, standing at the side, did not. He was looking at his daughter, who was across the room with Danny's wife and 6-month-old Marcus, and who had stopped paying attention to Marcus entirely and was watching Victoria on the stage with an expression that he would carry for the rest of his life. The pure, uncomplicated pride of a child watching someone she loves do something true. He thought about acceptable parameters. He thought about all the ways a life could be lived within them, safely, reasonably, without scandal or rupture. And all the ways a life lived that way slowly became a life you were watching rather than having. He thought about a wrong table on a Friday night, and a blind date that wasn't, and a small girl with ink on her wrist who had arrived in a restaurant in mismatched pajamas and asked a stranger if her wheelchair could pop wheelies. He thought about what it meant to find your way back to something you'd stopped believing was available to you, not by looking for it. He hadn't been looking for it, not even close, not with any part of himself he'd have acknowledged, but by being present enough in an ordinary moment that when it arrived, you recognized it. Victoria came off the stage and found her way to him through the crowd. "How was that?" she said. "The part about the threshold plate," he said. "Too specific?" "No." He looked at her. "It was exactly right." She looked back at him with the particular directness of a person who has decided they are done looking away from things. "Come on," she said. "Mia wants tacos." They found Mia at the edge of the room, Marcus handed back to Danny's wife, rabbit underarm, jacket already half on. She looked up at both of them with the assessing, satisfied expression of a small person whose plans have arrived at their intended destination. "Can we go?" she said. "The gala's still happening," Noah said. "I know. I've had enough gala." She looked at Victoria. "You said the good part already. The rest is just food and talking." Victoria looked at Noah. Noah looked at Victoria. Neither of them could argue with the logic. They said their goodbyes. Danny hugged Noah again, and this time Noah hugged back without commenting on the length. And the 3 of them went out into the March evening together, the city cold and clear around them, the street bright. Mia walked between them, the rabbit swinging from her right hand, and she reached up with her left and took Victoria's hand, and after a moment, she took Noah's with the other, and she said nothing about it. No announcement, no acknowledgement, just held on, the way children hold on to the things they've decided are theirs to keep. Nobody said anything for a block. Then Mia said, "The taco place has a new menu thing, birria. I've been researching it." "Researching it," Victoria said. "I read 4 reviews. 3 were positive. The methodology was inconsistent, but the consensus is good." Noah said, "You read restaurant reviews." "I read everything." She swung the rabbit once, considering. "Victoria, do you like birria?" "I don't know. I've never had it." "That's fine. You can have some of mine and decide." She said it with the perfect generosity of someone who has already calculated the exact amount they're willing to share. "We'll figure it out." They walked on through the March night. 3 people who had come to each other sideways through accidents and wrong tables and a 17-page document, and a child who kept showing up places she hadn't been invited and being entirely correct to do so. The story they'd been given by the world was not the story they'd ended up with. Noah had been a widower with a carefully managed distance from his own life. Victoria had been a CEO who had built architecture around her loneliness, so elegant that she'd almost mistaken it for contentment. Mia had been a 7-year-old who wanted her father to smile differently and had decided, with the terrifying practical clarity of the very young, to do something about it. None of them had arrived at this evening without damage. None of them were fixed. Victoria still shut down sometimes, and Noah still made elaborate sandwiches when he was avoiding things, and Mia still showed up at places without being invited and was sometimes wrong about the reviews. The threshold plates were not all fixed. The board would have another Gerald Holt eventually, because institutions always did. The pricing model would need defending again and again, and the fight would not get easier just because they'd won it once. But here is what is true, and what this story insists on. Love is not the absence of damage. It is not the resolution of every outstanding problem or the elimination of old fears. It is not a transformation scene with a clear before and after. It is 2 people, or 3, counting the small one with the rabbit, deciding to keep showing up for each other in the specific, imperfect, ongoing way that real things require. Victoria Sinclair had believed for 6 years that the accident had taken something from her that she would not get back. Not the use of her legs. She had made her peace with that, or the closest thing to peace that someone honest about the work it required can make. Something subtler. The belief that she was worth the full weight of someone's attention. That what she offered was not a diminished version of something that had existed before, but the actual, complete thing that she was now, complicated and controlled and occasionally impossible, and genuinely, deeply worth knowing. Noah Bennett had believed for 3 years that happiness was a thing you provided for other people and accepted for yourself in small, careful doses, because wanting too much was dangerous, and losing things was a tax the world levied on everyone eventually, and it was better to need less. He had been a devoted father and a good man, and quietly, thoroughly lonely in a way he'd stopped noticing, because he'd arranged his life so carefully around the loneliness that it had started to feel like the shape of the life itself. And Mia Bennett had believed, with the uncomplicated certainty of a 7-year-old who had lost her mother before she was old enough to fully understand what she'd lost, that the right people find each other if you give them enough proximity and the occasional logistical nudge. She had been the most right of all of them. The taco place was warm and bright when they pushed through the door. Bev at the counter looked up and said, "The usual?" And Mia said, "And birria. We're trying the birria." And Bev said, "Good choice," without blinking, and they found their corner booth and took off their coats and settled in. Mia examined the menu with the birria entry with the thoroughness of a person conducting due diligence. Victoria read the description over her shoulder, asking questions. Noah watched them both and thought about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of peace. This was not the ending of something. It was the particular point in a life where you look around at what is accumulated, the people, the work, the small, ordinary rituals, the booth in a taco restaurant, the girl with the rabbit, the woman across the table who was reading a menu description with her reading face on, precise and concentrated and real. And you understand that this is it. This is the thing. Not the destination you had planned for, not the version that matches the earlier blueprint, but the actual irreplaceable specific thing that is yours. The food came. Mia declared the birria excellent and shared exactly the amount she had calculated. Victoria said it was good with the tone of someone who had expected to be neutral and found themselves converted. Noah ate his and listened to Mia's escalating plan for a playground accessibility redesign that was, he had to admit, structurally sound. Outside, the city moved on in its usual way, indifferent to the small, important things happening in its corners. Somewhere across town, Danny Ruiz was putting Marcus to sleep and probably already thinking about the next favor he would need from Noah. Somewhere in a Columbus warehouse, Carl Reinhold was locking up for the night, the photo of his daughter still on the wall. Somewhere in a conference room, Dr. Park was probably still working, because Dr. Park was always still working, and the junction interface was solved, but there were 17 new problems where it came from. The work would continue. The hard things would stay hard. The threshold plates of the world were numerous, and the tools were never quite all in the right place at the right time. But here, in this booth, on this March evening, there was warm food and the particular noise of a small girl explaining structural load distribution to a CEO who was listening with genuine attention, and a man sitting across from both of them who had walked into the wrong restaurant 4 months ago and had been, in all the ways that mattered, exactly where he was supposed to be ever since. Some things begin with a mistake. That does not make them mistakes.